Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture. I know that I have a lot of comic book fans who subscribe and watch videos on this channel because I cover a lot of comic book stuff. Now, I guess any comic book fan will tell you that the first superhero in comic books was, of course, Superman, 1938. What maybe some people don't know is that Superman appears to have been largely based on a character named Hugo Danner from a book entitled Gladiator by Philip Wylie, published in 1930. And it's a really fascinating book, especially for those of us who have gone through the period from, say, the late 80s on of the deconstruction of the superhero, tearing them down, seeing what they're all about, and oftentimes, if we're honest, subverting them. What's really fascinating about Gladiator is it's really the first book about a character like this, kind of like a superhero. And it is sort of, well, a better deconstruction than I think anybody else has ever come up with. It's a hell of a story. So you'll notice this image here says LibriVox on it. So I read Gladiator, probably 7 or 8 years ago. I found it on Project Gutenberg. It is in the public domain, and loaded it onto my Kindle. I would love to get an actual copy of Gladiator, especially from that time period. I imagine they're rather expensive. Now, this time around, I knew I wanted to review the book, but it had been a long time since I read it. So I decided, since I was reading another book at the time, to just listen to it. So I found this LibriVox recording. It was actually on YouTube, but you could go to LibriVox as well. Read by Mike Pelton, and he does a pretty good job with it. He has the right voice because the book is set initially in the 1890s. And this is when Hugo Danner is born. And what we do in this book is we follow the course of his life from that point on. We actually even see what life was like for his parents before he came along. And that is involved in his origin. And then we see his childhood. And we get a hint of his teenage years in this little town in Colorado, so middle America, where he grows up. And we see him in college. And we see him fight in World War I. And then we see his post-war life. Now, I'm going to do my absolute best not to leave any spoilers on this one, because if you're a comic book fan, you really should read this book. Even if you're not a comic book fan, it's an excellent piece of work. Philip Wylie wrote sci-fi, he wrote pulp adventure stuff. He wrote a lot, and he's an interesting guy. He's a bit satirical. He will seemingly push one political idea and then snap back at it at the same time. He's a smart guy thinking things through. And it turns out that one of the characters in a book he wrote may have inspired the great pulp fiction hero Doc Savage, who himself was looked at as an inspiration for the Superman character. But maybe they both kind of had the same grandfather. And he also wrote When Worlds Collide. Now, that was made into a movie, I want to say in the 1960s. But apparently, some people have said it might have also been an inspiration, at least partially, for Flash Gordon, Ming the Merciless, Mongo, the planet going to hit. Okay, you get the idea. So maybe a lot of people have not heard in this day and age of Philip Wylie, but his ideas and the things he wrote certainly have had a big impact on global pop culture since. And again, if this was just sort of, and this is kind of what I thought I was going to read when I first read it, I go, well, it's going to probably be kind of a 1930s sci-fi thing with the guy who's, super strong or whatever. It is so much more than that. In fact, it's an important part of the story, but it's certainly not like a pulp version of a superhero story. It's not really an adventure story like a Doc Savage story would be. This is a story about a man's life who has these extraordinary abilities and the impact that they have on him, physically to some degree, but especially emotionally, spiritually. So let's start a little bit with the origins. How does Hugo Danner become the strongest man in the world, capable of lifting tons, capable of running at amazing speeds, and essentially invulnerable to bullets and just most harm, but not a broken heart? How does this happen? Well, his father is a professor at a little college in Colorado, and he is knowledgeable about chemistry, and he has certain ideas about treatments you could give a human being so that they would have these amazing abilities. And he actually points out, like ants and grasshoppers and what they're capable of doing. And why couldn't we maybe modify human muscles, human tissue, to do something similar? And that is sometimes, I think in one of the early origins of Superman, they kind of talk about things like that, the insects and their strength that seems to, belie how small they are. So right there, you might have a link. So this professor is a kindly guy. He has a wife who is a very strict religious woman, doesn't really like his chemistry, doesn't trust it. And they're obviously a little bit older. And it so happens that she becomes pregnant. And while this is happening, this professor has come up with his formula, and he's tested it on tadpoles. He's tested it on a mother cat and her kitten. And the kitten, even though, it's a full-grown cat at a certain point, even to a normal-sized cat, this thing gets loose and goes out and just wreaks havoc on the neighborhood. And people think there's a panther loose. So he decides, well, here's a chance to try this out on a human being. And even though he has some worries, he thinks, what a gift I'll be giving my son to make him the strongest man who has ever lived. And so he gets his wife a bit drunk on I think it was blackberry cordial, because she's not much of a drinking woman. And he might have even, I'm not sure if he gave her something to definitely put her out, but she passes out, and he injects something to give these abilities to his son. Now, this to me is actually a really important aspect of the story. And this is something we see in a lot of books, and you even see it, say, in the Bible. Something that begins with a bad foundation, generally speaking, is not going to last. It's not going to do well. A bad foundation, you get kind of a crooked house. This is not really the best way to go about testing this thing. And what follows, by and large, is tragic. All right, so gives these treatments, and they soon discover they have a boy who is extremely strong. And they have to train him not to use that strength around other people, not to hurt people, etc. So I'm going to read a passage from fairly early in the story where we see a glimmer of the, say, superheroic potential of Hugo Danner. Now, in this example, a wagon has hit a rut and it crashed, and a man is pinned under the rear axle, and he is in agony, and he very likely could die. And a bunch of people have run around, and one of them runs off to get a jack because they really can't lift this thing, at least they don't think they can. So at this point, Hugo, who's nearby, playing with the top, has seen this, and it's kind of chilled him, but he sees the distress the man is in and decides to do something about it. And bear in mind, he's a little kid at this point. So Hugo wound up his string and put it beside his top. He walked mechanically into the road. He looked at the legs of the man on the ground. They were oozing blood where the backboard rested on them. The men gathered there were lifting again without result. Hugo caught the side and bent his small shoulders. With all his might, he pulled up. The wagon was jerked into the air. They pulled out the injured man. Hugo lowered the wagon slowly. For a moment, no attention was paid to him. He waited pridefully for the recognition he had earned. He dug in the dirt with the side of his shoe. A man with a mole on his nose observed him. Funny how that kid's strength was just enough to turn the balance. Hugo smiled. I'm pretty strong, he admitted. Another man saw him. Get out of here, he said sharply. This is no place for a kid. But I was the one. I said beat it, and I meant beat it. Go home to your ma. So here we have Hugo saving a man's life, but he's just a kid. And of course, you can't fault people for not thinking that, he's got super strength. You wouldn't expect that. But they kind of treat him a little rough, and he's looking for recognition, and he doesn't get it. And this is going to become a theme in Hugo's life. What do I do with these abilities that I have? He wants to do something great. Now, there are many times where he uses them to save people's lives. He uses them in World War I. And let me tell you something. The World War I segments, several chapters, are incredible. They're amazing, really well written. And I'm telling you right now, there's nothing that's been done with the Superman character that more or less wasn't done with Gladiator. I'm not talking about stuff like Lex Luthor and all that kind of super villainy stuff, but I mean just the man, like Wylie really thought this stuff through. What kind of impact will these abilities have? Doing this, doing that, doing the other. So you get this life of this man looking for greatness and always sort of being denied. And there are points where you're seeing him start to live a life that maybe isn't grandiose and great, but would have been a good life. And he doesn't go that way. And it's very frustrating sometimes because you do kind of like Hugo Danner. He's not a perfect man. And I'll tell you again, 1930, if you think that this book has, now it's not obviously graphic or anything, but there's love, but there's also sex. There's a fair amount of sex actually in this book. It's a part of his life. And there is violence. And there's sorrow and deep friendships. And it's I say, you don't have to be interested in this kind of subject matter, sci-fi or superheroes or what have you, to enjoy this book, because it really is about a person, about his life, about the choices he makes and the things that the things that he's gone through and the impact they have on him. And like I said, for the most part, it is a fairly tragic story too, but well written. And you see from that sample, not super flowery, although there are moments where he gets a little more flowery about things. It's very matter of fact. And I really like it for that reason. So Gladiator. Oh, other thing to bring up. It is a rather interesting sort of a time capsule of the period, say from about 1890 to about 1930. Because he is very much a man of his time, of the world he lives in. So there are attitudes here and there, probably attitudes about class more than anything else, that people will nowadays go, dude, what is he doing? Why is he worried about that? So that does come into it a bit. There are attitudes about the Depression and, living through it and seeing the way tragedy impacts other people's lives. All I'm saying is, for a book written in 1930, it may, aside from some of the use of language, just the style of writing, it may appear to be a much more modern book than you would expect. I mean, let's be honest, it's almost 100 years old now. It's almost 100 years old, but very readable and very germane to even our times. So it's a great book in that regard too. But it is a good way, and books like this are always a good way. Well, I shouldn't say always, but they're usually a good way to just learn more about different time periods. And you have to understand, every author has certain biases and certain limits, etc. But if you read enough that was written in a particular period, you do pick up on a lot of things. And you do get this from Gladiator. So, Philip Wylie, Gladiator, 1930. It is a really good book. And I'd actually, listening to it again, I'd forgotten how good it really was. It really kept me engaged. And it really puts you through it too. And again, you talk about superheroic deconstructions. The very first superhuman was thoroughly deconstructed by his creator, Philip Wylie. And I don't think anything done since is even half as potent, as meaningful, as well done. So, if you've never read it, give it a try. I think you will enjoy it. Like I said, LibriVox, and you can find it on YouTube too. If you just want to listen to it, you can do it that way. If you want to read it, you can find it out there. Oh, and I will say, it did get an adaptation in Marvel Preview called Man God. They don't call him Man God. But now look at that image. Looks kind of heroic. Has maybe a little biblical feel to it, Samson. That's not, and I've never read the adaptation, so I couldn't say how well it was done. But that cover, that's not the guy that you're really getting. It's not a pulp adventure, rippling muscles kind of book. It's so much more than that. So there is that adaptation. But if you're a comic book artist, it's in the public domain. If you got the chops, you could turn this into a large graphic novel or a series of comic stories that would probably be absolutely incredible. Something to think about. If you're an artist who doesn't have a writer, or maybe you're not the greatest writer yourself, public domain, there's some good opportunities there, and Gladiator would be an incredible opportunity. So, folks, let me know what you think. If you've read this book and you have some thoughts about it, I'd love to see it in the comments. If you have any questions, especially if I can answer them without spoilers, I'll try to leave it in the comments. I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. If you enjoyed this little review of Gladiator, please maybe think of subscribing, sharing with a friend. That would be very, very groovy. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun. Read Gladiator. It is a really good book. I promise you. And I will see you hopefully again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.